Hello and welcome to Access Chat. I'm delighted that we're joined today by Anjali Vyas, who is joining us from the Pune chapter of the Multiple Sclerosis Society of India. Great to have you with us. I know we were just chatting before you came on air, but please tell us a little bit about your background because it's interesting and the work that you're doing as well. So welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Namaste to everybody. My name is Anjali Vyas, and I'm a person with multiple sclerosis. I've been living with this invisible neurological autoimmune disorder, also a recognized disability in the Disability Act in India since the past 10 years. The recognition of multiple sclerosis in the Act was done very recently, not very recent, I would say, but in the year 2016. But it's actually a big win for our community because up until 2016, for a person with multiple sclerosis to come out, especially if you have invisible symptoms, has been a big challenge. And now to be recognized as a disability has actually at least given us some rights through which we can at least build more awareness. I am a chemical engineer by qualification and an IELTS trainer, which is an English language trainer by profession. I'm also the co-founder of a newly registered organization called Believe in the Invisible that advocates for people with invisible disabilities and their communities through storytelling. So, in addition to my role as the joint secretary of MS Society Pune chapter, I'm also working in the area of, in general, advocating for people with invisible disabilities in India.
Anjali, can you share the story of your initial symptoms and diagnosis on MS and how that ended up changing your life and career path?
Oh, wow. That's a very nice question. I always like to answer that question whenever I'm asked that. So I was in my last year, which is like the final year of engineering, like that last leg. And I was just a month away from taking my exam, which is actually the most dreaded semester. We call it a semester. And I experienced some pain in my optic nerves in my right eye, optic nerve in my right eye. And again, it was very unusual for me to experience that. I thought that perhaps it is an infection or conjunctivitis, something that's maybe infectious in nature, because from the outside, I looked absolutely quote unquote normal. Right. There was no significant difference on my face or in my body for that matter. So for the first few days, I had that pain, that tingling in my optic nerve. And of course, when 3 days passed and when I realized that, there's something wrong when it comes to my vision because it got a bit blurry in my right eye, right? It appeared as if, something has perhaps pricked my eye. And that's the reason why I can't see things clearly. But then because I could see from my other eye, that's the funny part. I couldn't make it that, that there's something wrong with my right eye. But after 4 to 5 days, it just so happened that I was crossing the road and I could not see the truck coming by. And fortunately, I had my friend who pulled me back and saved me from that terrible accident.
Wow.
I really thank him. Yeah. And that's when I realized that my peripheral vision is gone. I couldn't see the truck coming by. And when I went to the ophthalmologist and complained about these symptoms, he did all those preliminary tests, dilated my eyes, had some tests run. But even to him, everything appeared absolutely normal. Now he gives me certain medications, some eye drops, and asks me to come if at all things don't improve. But after a few days, I realized that, I could not see clearly because the vision was dropping. So when I went after a few days, after my first checkup, he lit a torch in front of my eye from which I could not see and asked me a few questions to answer. And when he asked me, okay, what do you see? I had no idea what was happening because I could not even detect the light. Now imagine the extent of vision loss in a couple of days, just like that. And it was very unusual for a 20-year-old to have that symptom of vision loss with no medical history of any such condition whatsoever. And again, it was the prime of my life, right? And frankly, in that age, no youngster bothers to even think about what's wrong with their body, right? But fortunately, when I said that I can't see, I don't even know that you have lit the torch in front of my eye. That's what freaked him out. But I really thank my God and my stars that day that he actually recommended me to a neuro-ophthalmologist, who then ran some important tests, critical tests such as the MRI, etc. And that's when the demyelination factor came into the picture that had caused my vision loss, which ultimately was told to be of multiple sclerosis.
Okay.
And again, it's something which is a tongue twister still today too. Yeah.
I know Deborah's got a question, but for our audience, maybe we might want to explain what demyelation is. Essentially, this is the sheath around
Correct.
your nerves, right?
Correct.
And MS starts interfering with the sheath around your nerves, which is what then causes the problems. Deborah, over to you.
Yes, and thank you so much for, first of all, all that you're walking personally. I know that you said you had a fellowship, a 3-year fellowship, and towards the end, the MS started affecting the way that affecting your life. I have a very dear friend of mine that has been diagnosed with MS, and it also attacked her eye first. It attacked her eyes first, and so. It is a scary diagnosis, and you don't know where it will go. And I know right now in the United States, Christine Applegate, who is a beloved actress, a lot of people know around the world, she's really struggling openly with her MS. And I was, first of all, I was grateful that you took something personal and you made it your advocacy goal. You made it a way to help others. But I also thought it was such an interesting point that you said about, because once again, I live in the United States, I'm a global citizen, but a lot of times there are things that I make some assumptions about. And one of those assumptions is that MS would automatically be included in any disability legislation. And of course, I would be incorrect by saying that. But one thing I would want to ask you is why is it important for a diagnosis like MS or any other diagnosis to be included in legislation? I mean, there's so many reasons why, but I wanted to ask you that. And at the same time, I am intrigued about how India, once again, we've had other Indian citizens on, but as a reminder to the audience, India has 1 billion, almost 500 million souls. And here in the United States, we have 330 million Americans, for example. And but I'm curious what India is going to do with all of these. How is India going to shift and change and value all of the people? And so I was wondering if you would just talk about it from those angles. Why is it important that we're included in the legislation? Why do we have to make sure people understand our lives? And, when we're diagnosed with something like MS, how does that change us? How can you support us? Just taking it from that direction. Thank you.
Sure. Just one quick correction. It was not during my fellowship, but engineering, when I was diagnosed with MS.
Thank you.
Fellowship was very recent. Yes. So I think my very honest answer as to why a condition like multiple sclerosis should be recognized as a disability is because what is not seen is mostly not believed. It's extremely important that conditions, and not just multiple sclerosis, I genuinely feel that when we talk about neurological conditions, as a category in itself, it's very important for people to understand that it's neurological, it's not psychological. It's not in my brains that I'm faking my disability, right? It's actually something that is troubling me to carry out my regular day-to-day activities. Now, why MS was very important to be recognized is because majority of the symptoms, initial symptoms and the challenges of multiple sclerosis are invisible, but they equally affect the quality of life of an individual.
Yes.
And most importantly, it is a condition that is diagnosed in the prime of the life of an individual. So young adults are mostly affected because of MS, right? So when I was planning my career, I wanted to do so many things. Again, I don't regret my decision of switching my career, but then it did at least affect even that judgment of my life, right? To maybe switch my track from something to a different one. So when we say that a country like India, which has got the highest demographic dividend in the world, needs to have conditions like MS recognized as disability so that people know that it affects the quality of life of these individuals. It's important that you believe them. We're not faking our disability. We only need your support and simply understanding that, even the disabilities which are not seen exist, and that I might face some challenge at my workplace for that matter in terms of fatigue. Let's just say, right? I'm severely fatigued some days. I just don't feel like even getting up from my bed and have a glass of water, right? And if I ask my employer to help me with certain accommodations like giving me flexible working hours or maybe getting me a parking slot in the very organization's parking space, I might not be believed and perhaps be questioned back. Why? You look normal, you're healthy. And don't worry, Anjali, it's all in your brains. Just be positive. I am positive. Okay,
Wow.
you can tell me that. Yes, I have been told these many statements and unsolicited advices throughout my life. And again, I now I don't blame them. Not in retrospection, I actually feel that building awareness is important than complaining, and that's why I co-founded this organization to build greater awareness. Yes, I
Wow.
hope that answers your question.
That was brilliant response. That was brilliant.
Thank you. Yeah. I think the issues that you raised around lack of trust and belief impact huge populations of people, and it really is that lack of belief when people are asking for accommodations in the workplace is definitely an area where we need to educate more people and really work on the basis of trust. People don't ask for things, and for the most part, that they don't need, but there is that lack of understanding still, and not just in India, by the way. This is a universal thing that people with invisible conditions get questioned.
Can I quickly add one thing here, one sentence? So, in addition to all of that I just said, it's also the stigma. Okay, it's not just the fear, it's the shame. It's also people's misbelief that it is the result of karma, and especially when we talk about some of the very sort of orthodox thinking society, especially I know that such a society exists everywhere in the world, but I want to add one experience of mine where I was offering a glass of water to one of my educated family members, and he was hesitant of getting or taking that glass of water from me because he thought that maybe it's contagious, and he actually asked me that. And when I say educated family member, I mean it. Okay, so we used to have conversations in science and whatnot, and the fact that he asked me that not just once but twice really sort of made me work even more hard on this aspect of just dismissing and busting the myths around invisible disabilities, because as I said, if it's not seen, people feel that it might be contagious, it could be fatal, it could be genetic, hereditary, and whatnot, right? And all
Uh, in your experience and based on your knowledge of the social current environment where you are, do you feel that there are many disabilities who are not considered officially as disabilities in India? Is that can we assume that?
Yes, definitely we can assume that.
So,
Because
because something that we discuss in this forum for quite some time is about the numbers of people with disabilities. No, now how many
right.
people we have around the world. So my question to follow that, and I appreciate, is that In fact, the fact that disabilities are not recognized, it somehow creates a problem here, because in the end, there's a huge number of people out there who, even if they have a disability, they don't show up in the statistics. And what else? How this impact society itself, families, and how this impacts the way our government puts together policies to support these individuals.
Great
Definitely.
point.
Yes, yes. So there is definitely a challenge when it comes to, the governmental or government's intervention when it comes to having this data. So data has been the biggest problem of all times, and I'm sure that it's not just only in India but many other countries. But for the disability community, it had been a constant challenge. I can very happily and proudly say that things are improving, definitely, because the problem is when the data is collected, it's a 10-year census data, right? So the survey, which was conducted in the year 2011, the results or the information of that census survey has been released last year. So this entire 10-year gap actually somewhere is is disadvantageous to our community, because then if there are no numbers, there's no data, how would we even advocate for the policies to be even implemented for that matter, right? And when you asked me that, are there any other disabilities which might need that recognition and are not, there are many, right? So when I say chronic neurological conditions, I'm happy that, some of the policies and sections in our act have been recently revised, very recently, a month, 2 months ago. And I'm very happy to see that they have considered a lot of other conditions as well. Of course, they cannot come up with an exhaustive list, but at least they are open to accommodating and adding new disabilities. But again, you cannot just categorize the disabilities into one set. We have also people with congenital heart conditions. It's as invisible, right? When we talk about inflammatory bowel syndrome, anything that goes below your heart and chest, even that's something which is equally disabling. So we need to come up with even these areas and sections, and I'm sure that we are going to work on these aspects as well. But coming back again to the fact that I think you were asking about the data, right? How important it is. So the challenge has always been collecting the data. Last year there was this big I won't say a fight, but yes, a struggle for our community where a very one of the very important surveys that happened in India is National Health and Family Welfare Survey, okay, NHFS. Now that's one survey which is conducted in every small town or a village in India in order to collect information as to how many people live with what, of what background, the ages, etc. And up until the last year, whatever number of surveys were conducted had a question of disability added in that survey. Unfortunately, it was dropped down in the recent survey, which happened last year. So it had been, a bigger fight for all of us, because whatever surveys are conducted in India, irrespective of whatever segment you want to do it, I personally feel that the question on disability is something that should be a mandatory one, whether you are considering doing a survey on employment scenario, whether it is related to education, even for that matter impact of climate change in general on people. Having a question dedicatedly on the data of disability is something that I strongly feel must be included. And I can see slowly things changing in our country. I'm sorry if I missed any part of your
No,
question.
no, I asked you because I've been looking at different questions that are being asked in census around the world, and I've seen that sometimes from one census to the other, the question changes,
Yeah.
and suddenly people with disabilities, they just disappear
Mm.
in relation to the previous census because the question was asked differently. Sometimes the questions is so ambiguous that people don't really know. Oh, am I? Am I not? No, you have that kind of dilemma. And on the other is, like you were saying, you were talking about the story of giving a glass of water to a family member. Is that sometimes census documents are being filled in by other people, not directly by the person with disability.
Yeah.
So people might end up hiding a family
Absolutely.
member
Absolutely.
from the
Yep.
And imagine if we have women with disabilities, it's all the more compounding. It's actually something that people dread here. I can see that shift in the mindset here, but I think we have a walk to a path to walk to get there still. But yes, especially when we talk about the percentage of women with disabilities and other communities as well, not just women, but even our trans community for that matter. We need to have that disaggregated data, gender-based, the type of disability, etc. I feel so, yeah.
And also, I know that I'm being naive, but I don't know. I guess I'm looking forward for a time when we do not decide that people that they're born with disabilities or they acquire a disability because karma or because religious beliefs or other ridiculous things. Because even if in another life I stole horses and so I was a horse thief, what? It doesn't. Come on. I need to be responsible for this lifetime. Do I have to all? And then we have karma and that kind of stuff. And then in some of the African countries, some of the witch doctors. It's just really, really chilling. The stuff that people have to deal with just because they're normal human beings that might have MS and they're normal human beings that might have a blood clot disorder like my daughter, Sarah. That has it has really, really hurt her body a lot.
Yeah.
Her Down syndrome was nothing compared to this blood clot disorder, what it's done to her. So I know it's more than having empathy, but there is so many problems associated with disability inclusion and us even being accepted in society. It's just, sometimes it just feels like it's too big to wrap your head around. So I just am very grateful for leaders like you that are saying, well, I'm doing it. I don't care if you don't like it. I'm going to do it. We're going to talk about it. And that's another reason why here on Access Chat, we've been doing this for 10 years, but at first we were really good about sticking to the word accessibility. And then we realized that word accessibility is so big. And this is really about, we had a guest on a couple of weeks ago, Thomas Babinski, and he said, I'm not going to use the word accessibility anymore. I'm using the word inclusion.
Yes.
Because it really is, I mean, it's a tough diagnosis, MS. And it's a scary diagnosis because we don't know what's going to come in the future. And so for society on top of it to just treat you like you do not matter and that you're less than human, it just hurts us so much, which is another reason why we've got to get together, which is what we're doing here. But I just wanted to state, I really appreciate it. But I've talked about this before, but one thing y'all were making me think about, Antonio triggered it, was I know that there was a census that was being done years ago in Panama, it's probably 10, 15 years ago. And as they were going into the countrysides, families that had members with disabilities were hiding them because they thought the government was coming to take them away or somehow hurt them or hurt the family. And so they hid them so that the government workers could not see. And so, and often people with disabilities, especially people like my daughter with Down syndrome or intellectual disabilities, they're hidden at home and they are an embarrassment to the family and they're not allowed out. And I'm going to get on the soapbox. No, I'm not. But I know here in the United States, I'm always talking about my fellow Americans. It's like, y'all don't understand. It's bad here. But you leave our borders and it gets real bad for our community. That's why we are stronger together. But I just really appreciate your work, Anjali. I really do. And do you mind talking a little bit about the fellowship you had?
Yeah, sure. So the fellowship was basically announced by this organization called the National Center of Promotion of Employment of Disabled People. It's one of the leading organizations here in India, based in New Delhi, the capital. And it invited people, young people or young adults, people with disabilities, young leaders with disabilities, of course, to actually make them the new next-gen leaders in the disability sector. And around 25 people or 25 young leaders in disability sector were selected in this fellowship. I was fortunate and I really feel blessed that I was selected and I was one of the fellows. And different fellows of different living with different kind of disabilities, worked in different areas. And the area I chose was on invisible disability because of definitely my lived experience. That was the primary reason as to why I chose that aspect. Secondly, is because with the MS Society of India, I have been the part of the National Advocacy Project, where we have been trying to fight for the rights of people with multiple sclerosis in the area of the assessment of the disability percentage. So here's a catch here. So in India, when we talk about getting a disability certificate or a unique disability ID, in order to even qualify for that, you need to have a proper assessment done. And that has been done by a panel, right? And these panels are made in different government hospitals here in India. They will make you do certain tasks, get you or make you undergo certain tests. And based on the results of those tests and the tasks performed by these people, they come up with a definite percentage of disability, the severity of disability. And then, of course, this percentage also is then in that way quite instrumental in getting people the provisions under the Act. So in order to avail a disability pension that we call in India, right, which I think, if I'm not wrong, in the US, you call it a PIP, if I'm not wrong. Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's similar to that. So I was there in the US last year for a month for the IVLP program by the US Department of State. So that's when I heard this term. So even to avail a pension, for that matter, financial support from the government, you need to qualify. If you have, say, for that matter, 80% disability, only then you're entitled to a certain amount, right? So for people with MS in India, it was very tough to even get that assessment done. Because as soon as I walk into the hospital, sit in front of the panel, and get certain tests done, the first question that they will ask is, what is your problem? You're normal, you're fine, you don't look disabled, you don't need that, right? So this happens in various parts of our country. To me, it did not happen because then I was quite vocal and I actually sort of intimidating those people when I entered the hospital. I said, hey, listen, I know my rights. You cannot send me away unless you get my assessment done. And if the doctors tell that I have, say, 20% disability, I'll go away. But you need to first at least get me assessed. You can't just send me away because I look non-disabled, right?
Wow.
So that's one challenge. Most people with invisible disabilities and with MS, it's very, very prevalent. And we have been working in this area, and that's what inspired me to work in this specific area of employment. Because then once you get a UDID, even in order to sort of prove your disability, sadly, you need to show them a card, right? I mean, that's something that is, everywhere. And in order to even get that card, it's a challenge. So I thought that, maybe while my organization, MS Society of India, is anyways working in the very assessment of these guidelines to get people assessed for the percentage of disability, I can, parallelly work in the area of employment. And through my research, I actually ran a baseline survey, which had around 128 participants. It was a Google form survey, and I also had conducted a few interviews, 10 to 12 interviews, telephonic interviews, with people with multiple sclerosis and a few with the blood disorders community. And in that interview, I definitely asked them questions as to what challenges do they face on regular day-to-day life, and when it comes to employment, what sort of affects their workability at the workplace. Do they know what reasonable accommodation means? Because even a section on reasonable accommodation, having equal opportunity policy in every organization is a must, and that's in our law. And I was shocked to know that 80% of my respondents said that they don't even know that a thing called equal opportunity policy exists.
Wow.
Right? Or for that matter, there's a thing called reasonable accommodation. Then I realized that, okay, we keep on complaining that people don't know about it, but then even the disability community here are unaware of their rights, right? So we need to bridge that gap together. So it's important that we, while we are doing the sensitization awareness programs and whatnot with the corporates, with the private sector companies mostly here in India, it's important that we also educate our people on their own rights, right? And of course, through that server, there were many other, highlights that actually shook me, where I came to know that even corporate insurance was one of the challenges as to why people did not disclose their disability at the workplace. most of these people fear disclosing. And I know some of my people in my community are also against the term disclose, because they see that the term itself is in a way sort of an exclusion factor, acts as an exclusion factor, so we need to sort of settle it down. But then yes,
I agree. So
I agree too. I agree too.
A great friend of our show, Kate Nash, wrote about a book about disclosure, which was called Secrets and Big News. And they were talking about self-ID rather than disclosure, because disclosure is usually when you're telling something about something that you've done is bad.
Yes.
Right.
And so there's a negative connotation to it.
Yes.
And so I understand why the disability community quite often doesn't like the term disclosure.
But I personally also feel that there's so much, as even Deborah was mentioning, there's so much out there. We don't even know what's right and wrong. Frankly,
I know.
I am still learning. I mean, I get so scared when I have to say, let's just say, talk to the LGBTQ community sometimes. It's so tough. I'm constantly, wondering in my head, did I say something wrong? And it goes for even the disability community for that matter.
Right.
For sure it does. But I think that, actions speak louder than words, and certainly working in an international context, whatever we say will upset someone.
Absolutely.
Because the cultural differences between people in different countries mean that what is seen positively in one country is determined to be negative in another. So I'm forever walking through that minefield. But I was really interested, in what you're talking about in the sort of the whole classification and gatekeeping piece, because it's a big issue, people getting access to the assessments, because that unlocks the benefits and everything else. And if we look at the Indian government statistics, only 2.1% of the population is classified as disabled, which is
ridiculous.
Minuscule. Right, so some of that comes down to what's classified as a disability. Some of it then is down to the fact that people don't know that they need to get the declarations, etc. And then there's also the fear that you just mentioned as well. So people don't do it because they think, I would rather hide it and not prejudice my chances of getting a job or staying in employment. So it looks like you're going to have to do work on multiple fronts. How do you think that you can influence the government on some of this stuff? And Antonio's put in the chat that this doesn't just impact India. This is something that happens in multiple countries. But do you think that with the MS Society of India and other OPDs that you can start to influence government to take sort of broader definitions and encourage easier access to diagnosis and classification?
This is very interesting, because when I was presenting my baseline study to some of the seniors and stalwarts in this sector, I said that my basic problem is with the definition of disability itself, because when we talk about physical impairment altogether in the definition, it limits the participation and inclusion of people with other disabilities. So then I was told by the senior of mine that, then you will have to challenge UNCRPD. I said I might as well do that, because, there is a problem, definite problem, because we have ratified UNCRPD. But again, it depends on the countries as to how they want to take the definition of disability. I'm really happy that at least in the US, we do not have an exhaustive list of disabilities, right, to follow. Even long COVID, to my surprise, was considered as a disability. So I personally feel that when it comes to influencing the government, it's important that every stakeholder is actually included in the conversations and the decision-making process. Sadly, for the past many years, I did not see that. But now, as I said, things are improving. I have witnessed, people being the part of the actual committees in the government organizations where decisions on even, let's just say, accessibility or inclusion for that matter in general, are taken into consideration. People with affected by disabilities and not just living with disabilities are taken into these discussions, right? There are many organizations, especially in India, leading NGOs that are, having consultations yearly. And some of these organizations are actually doing a fantastic job. The organization of which I am the part, under the fellowship program, they hold these early consultations. And in these early consultations, they invite even the government officials to be the part of it, so that they get to hear what the disability community at large wants, right? So I feel that having the last member in the family in the discussion is true inclusion. And that's when you can actually make that change. Because even people with disabilities can have a biased opinion. I will not shy away from saying that,
That's
right?
true.
Because when I started my fellowship and research, I had a different reason as to why I was doing that. But by the end of my research, I realized that, hey, I have been complaining all the while, but my own friends don't know that they have rights. Correct? So it's important that all these people are actually made to sit in a circle together, have these opinions placed on a piece of paper, and not just on the piece of paper, but regular conversations. I every time I'm invited for any significant celebration or a day that signifies, let's just say, celebrates MS for that matter, on 30th of May. Whenever I'm invited for a talk on that, I always towards the end tell them that, listen, I am available throughout the year. You can call me anytime to talk about MS. So why only on the 30th of May? So conversations on disabilities, I think, need to happen every now and then. Only then I think it will be true inclusion, and not just on the 3rd of December. And of course, you need to also value their labor and time. So don't just call us. In fact, it's important that you can also invite people who are the caregivers to these people with disabilities. I think that even they are the greatest warriors of all times. They will have their own sort of recommendations to provide to the government, right? If I cannot help a person with disability with any empowerment opportunity, let's just say a person is totally bedridden because of the severity of disability, can't I help the next family member, his or her caregiver, to maybe find a good job so that they can at least have enough money to make the both ends meet, right? And I actually want to work in this project as well, which I'm planning to work on with the MS Set of India, where we'll also work on empowering and financially uplifting the caregivers,
Yeah.
so that they can very well take care of our people with disabilities as well, if a person with disability is not in that condition to work. So it's important that you see every segment of our society with that lens. That's what I feel inclusion means.
We definitely need to take a sort of whole ecosystem view of this to be able to understand, that you don't just support the individuals, you support the support networks, and that you create something that works for the whole of society. A lot of the time we try and look at an individual issue and don't understand the connectivity and everything else at a systemic level. It's been a great conversation. We've so good that we've run a little over. So I do need to thank our friends and sponsors, Amazon and My ClearText, for keeping us online and captioned, and look forward to us continuing this conversation when we take it to social media. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. It was fun.
It was fun.